So, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are going to hear from Tyler Durham, who is on, and we will give folks a little heads up. We have a special guest this evening joining Tyler, and so we appreciate everyone's willingness to make it all happen. I will let Tyler tell us a little bit more about himself. What I can tell you is he's one of the newest members of the Waterville Valley Recreation Department, and we're really excited to have him in the Valley. And tonight he's going to share a little bit of his own personal experiences, not necessarily related to the rec department. And from the little bit that I've seen of the images that he has to share, we're really excited to hear from you, Tyler. So please, thank you so much for joining us, and we're glad to have you on.
All right. Yeah, so I was recently hired just back in May as the Parks and Adventure Programs Manager for the Recreation Department in Waterville Valley. And Leah and I were talking about, doing one of these speaker series as a bit of an introduction, but also with some information that may be of interest or hopefully inspiring for anyone who's ever thought about just getting on a bicycle and extending that ride a little bit longer. So I put together a slide, some slides from trips that I've done throughout the years. Some, more like extended weekends, others more expedition style, multiple months, multiple countries sort of scenario. My little friend here is Sage, who he now accompanies me on many of my bike rides, but most of these images are from before he was around. So I'll see if I can share my screen here.
And I wanted to extend to Tyler. We spoke about it earlier. We knew that we were going to have a special guest in addition to Tyler. And so, again, appreciate patience. And if at some point we need to move on, we'll change the discussion. And Tyler can do another part of his important work, which is to be dad right now. So, again, Tyler, just to do what you need to do there.
Is that working, the screen share?
Currently, I just see you.
Okay.
And Sage.
Okay.
We will all look at that. Everyone's patient and waiting.
Okay. Is that working now?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah. So I'd just like to encourage folks, as I said, to get on your bike and maybe just keep riding one of these times. And why go by bike? Because it's really fun. You get to see a lot of amazing places. So this shot is from Mongolia. This is Kyrgyzstan. And those couple of shots are from a tour I did in 2013, beginning in Kyrgyzstan and going across Kazakhstan, Russia, and Mongolia. This is Venice, the San Juan Islands, the Dolomites in Italy during the Giro d'Italia, because you get to see, in addition to a lot of amazing places, also some amazing people. Here are some folks in France who saw my brother and I on the road and invited us into their home and some folks in Mongolia who invited my partner and I on that trip into their home. This is very typical of what the inside of a Mongolian gur looks like, with the stove in the middle, and beds on either side with kind of kitchen tools on one side and animal herding and husbandry tools on the other. These are some people that made the Wall of Fame in a restaurant in Mongolia. It's a really awesome collection of folks, I thought. And this little guy here was also pretty typical of what would happen when in Mongolia when we set up our tent. Invariably, there would be someone who was returning home with their herds and would stop and have a conversation. This little guy said that he was 13, I think, but just, I mean, so carried so much more responsibility and maturity than many people I know who are much older than that. Really, really awesome person. And here's a bit of the how to do it. There's really lots of different ways. You know, anything from just starting, oh, let me see. There we go. Just a bike and a bag strapped to your back. My brother came to visit me. I was studying in France for a semester, and so we spent a couple weeks traveling around France and Italy with just our road bikes and you know, a big messenger bag. So you don't really need specialized equipment. But another way to go is to get a rack and panniers. And this was the setup my wife and I had when we toured for you know, a long week in the San Juan Islands. So as you can see, you know, she has the one rear pannier, and then I've got the trailer. And it's funny, you know, the setup for you know, 8 days isn't much different than the setup for 80 days, really. But I'm a big fan of the trailer because then, you know, whatever bike you have, you can make it into a touring rig that you can take on into some pretty rugged country. And that trip, again, I said, was through the San Juan Islands, and really cool way to explore that part of the country. Just hop on the ferry with the bikes and, you know, we're good to go. This was for that larger expedition. This is what things looked like when we arrived at our place in Kyrgyzstan. But all of this stuff, we decided to fly with my partner and I at the time. Her name is Adrian, and we each had a steel hardtail 29er, and we both bought trailers and boxed up our bikes. And then the first place that we stayed when we landed in Kyrgyzstan, we assembled them. And then this was what our setups looked like when we spent the next 4 months on our bikes. As you can see, there's the trailers with a couple water bottle mounts where we kept fuel for our stoves. No frame bags. Really the only equipment that we were carrying on the bikes themselves were the handlebar bags. And those bags sometimes were loaded with quite a bit of weight. Here's another view of that bag. And, you know, in those first images I showed where I just had the messenger bag on, you know, that's a simple, easy, quick way to go. There's something really nice about not having anything on your body when you're riding for 8, 10, 12 or more hours a day. But you also don't have to do that. It's kind of the beautiful thing about going on the bike tour is that if you have all day to ride a bike, then you can really cover some distance. You can ride for an hour or two, stop, take a break, and then keep going. But this is the setup for those longer days. And here again, you can see what it looked like when we had our tent set up. And these images are in Kyrgyzstan here. But I'm a big fan of trailers and what they allow you to do. So this particular trailer here is one that a friend of mine made out of electrical conduit. And this is getting ready to take a refrigerator to the dump. This was just a test run. I apologize that I was not wearing a helmet. I definitely encourage people to do that and do it all the time now myself. This is another load with that trailer. This is vegetable oil that was being taken down to a local auto body shop to be used to run a diesel Jetta. And as you can see, that's quite a bit of liquid, very heavy. It was much easier to go downhill with this than it was to go uphill. But it is really amazing what you can carry with a bicycle. And I actually used this trailer to move one time from Plymouth down to Epping. Just had a couple of plastic bins and a couple other bicycles loaded up on top. So that's kind of how the bikes can be set up, just from fully loaded for months at a time to moving your household, or just strapping a bag to your back and heading out for a long weekend. Or if you have a good credit card, you can travel lightly for much longer periods of time, depending on where you are. But there's different ways to fuel your ride too. This is often what dinner looked like on that tour through Central Asia. Noodles, whatever vegetables we could find. This one was a lucky pot because it had some nuts and, other things in it. Pardon me, sorry, my assistant just helped me out.
It's always good to have extra help.
Yeah.
There you are.
Okay.
We can give you a second there. We're getting more folks joining us, so that's good. I'm always surprised, or I guess I shouldn't be surprised. You did get a little extra help on this one, but even a year of doing so many more pieces online and virtual, those of us who do it all the time still run into the reality that, where are you in there? There we go.
No, wasn't it?
That's a preview of staff orientation for the rec department.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. We can all use it.
Stop. I'm gonna.
He did a good job.
Okay. Let's see if I can find it again.
Well, we can give folks, you are all muted right now. We are viewing only Tyler. But at this point, it's fun to have folks around, not just right now to see your adventures, but the resources that exist in the valley and exist all around. I would really encourage folks to check out what's going on over at the rec department and talk with Tyler. I'm looking forward to having more conversations about our everybody's life adventures.
I think I'm back.
Okay, right now there you are,
Okay,
beautiful. The
so this
bowl.
is what dinner was often looking like on that trip. Um, this that picture, that's Adrian, who was my partner for that trip. You can get a pretty good look at the bike in the background. We both were riding these leather saddles made by a company in the United States called Sella Anatomica, which was great when we were riding a lot of terrain like that. This bag is not one that we brought. This is a bag that a gentleman who showed up on a horse at our camp in the evening brought to us. The previous night, he had asked what we had to, what we were eating for dinner, and we told him, we usually have noodles. These conversations weren't that easy because I don't speak Mongolian very well. And so this gentleman showed up with this I Love New York bag full of dried goat meat. And so that made its way into our pot of noodles the next couple nights. This is making some dumplings in someone's house. Folks were super nice, inviting us into their homes quite frequently to have tea or to spend the night in their gur. And this particular family here, if anyone ever asks, what is the most interesting / grossest thing you've ever eaten, I will refer to a meal that I got to share with this family. Because this wasn't it, but it looked a lot like that, except that from underneath their bed, these folks pulled out a stainless steel bowl of jiggling organ meat and sliced off a piece of liver. And so we were treated to eating some raw liver. Which the first bite was hard. The second bite was really hard. But it wasn't always like that. This home here is someone who's a member of the Satan people. And they are reindeer herders who live in northern Mongolia, kind of in the Siberian, the southern stretches of Siberia. And that's drying reindeer meat that you see above that woman's head there. This is tea that we had along the way to go visit those folks with the reindeer. Very typical of a lot of Mongolian homes having sort of a salty milk tea that they would offer to people. And, just so warm and very generous with their food and their time. But this is another way to go in the San Juan Islands. That's my wife, Spring. Another way to travel by bike is to stay in campgrounds and bed and breakfasts and have a nice hot cup of coffee as you're riding the ferry to your next destination. And this picture I included because of the red bladder in the foreground here. That's very helpful on many trips, particularly that longer expedition style. Having something that folds up pretty small when it's not full, but can hold a good quantity of water. And this was often filled with water from questionable sources and a few drops of iodine and a good length of time sloshing around. Drank a lot of hot sun-heated slightly iodine tasting water on that bigger trip. But this image here is from that San Juan trip. Another thing to consider is what sort of shelter you're going to bring. People can go quite light, but if you're in it all day like that, it's nice to have some sort of refuge, which is why I prefer to bring a tent rather than like a bivy sack or something lighter. Sometimes when the sky looks like that, it's really nice to be inside a tent rather than outside. This was in September, in September in Mongolia. We had set up our tent, and we had our usual nightly visitor. And this particular gentleman invited us to his house, which was it was a couple kilometers away, to have tea with him. But we had already set up our tent and kind of disassembled our bikes, which took a little bit. So we very much thanked him for his offer, but decided we would stay in the tent. This is him the following morning, again coming to offer us tea, which we took him up on. We broke down our tent and actually ended up spending the day and then the following night in his home with his wife around a warm stove, which was very kind of them. And this again is very typical. That the road that we were riding is probably down on that plain. We would just try to get kind of off of the main road, and I mean, often in Mongolia, you're not going to find a copse of trees or anything like that. So you just find a spot that has the least spiky things and flattest ground, and that's kind of where you set up your tent. And then this is in Kyrgyzstan. So if you're on the dusty trail and you're dealing with navigating through lots of animals and lots of people, this person here is probably asking where we are from in Russian. Sometimes we would be riding on roads and we wouldn't even see the person. We could just hear people calling from distant hillsides. Akuda vui, like, where are you from? What country are you from? And sometimes we would just keep pedaling and just shout America off into the distance. And this also is in Kyrgyzstan. And so the traditional Kyrgyz folks are also spending the summer months up in higher terrain, letting their animals graze before going down into the valleys in the winter. And so setting up these yurts up on the higher ground. And then this is from that trip in Spain or in Italy and France. It's my brother and I. And it was so nasty. This is the top of Mont Ventoux, which is a very storied climb in Tour de France history. One of the most frigid descents. My brother and I still talk about it. It was 15 years ago. It was just really miserably cold, so it was very nice to then stay in not a tent that night. This is some of the terrain that we rode on that trip following the Giro d'Italia in the Dolomites there. And then this is an image from Venice. When we arrived in Venice, because we each just had a messenger bag and our road bikes, very thin tires, and but we were primarily riding paved roads on that particular European tour. But our when we stayed in Venice, he and I stayed in a very low cost budget hostel, but there was no room there for our bicycles. So our bikes actually stayed in this very nice, like, 5-star hotel, and we were reunited in the morning. And then this is on going to Friday Harbor on San Juan Island, as you can see by the sign up above, on that ferry and bike trip. And on this one, we were very lucky to stay with a friend of Springs who is one of the owners of the local brewery. And so his home had chickens, and it was just a really nice treat in the middle of that trip to be able to stay with some good friends. And that's something that just I really want to encourage, anyone who's thinking about it at all. There's so many ways to do it, and around here in New England, there's a lot of people who know someone who lives on the seacoast, or lives over in Portland or Burlington, and you can spend a long weekend just riding to see them and come back. So I would definitely encourage folks to do that. I don't have any really pictures to share from trips that I've made, like up into Quebec, but a long weekend up to Quebec and back is it's kind of amazing, and you can do it. You just go and keep going. Some other considerations when choosing where to sleep for the night in Mongolia. There were a few times, one night in particular, when I was pretty sure that we were going to be trampled by horses in the middle of the night, because our tent was, pretty small and gray and boulder looking. But we did survive, but also were able to see some amazing things on that trip. In this picture here, you can see a little crack in that trailer, because there were days that we would be carrying 2 weeks worth of food and 2 days worth of water. So the trailer would weigh, more than 80 pounds, getting bounced around pretty heavily on some very rough roads. And so down below, in a similar spot, there's actually, the metal looks really dirty, like there's mud clinging to it, which there is, but there's also a weld that's already happened down there. And we specifically chose to be riding steel bikes with steel trailers, knowing that if anything happened, we could get something fixed. And there you can see that weld a little closer. Plastic bags are amazing. You don't have to have, crazy gear. And also when you're on a tour, you get to be creative, and, you have a limited amount of supplies. What you are bringing is what you have. And so a plastic bag on the outside of a sock is a great way to make a shoe way warmer when it is wet out. And some people choose to go lighter. Some people choose to go slower. We met some folks from Spain who were carrying a small pressure cooker, and they had left Spain with 2 kilograms of spices, just because they really valued eating good meals when they were on their tour. This is, something that's really liberating about being on a bike, is that it actually makes other side trips really accessible, because you can just find a spot to store a bicycle, which is easier than finding spots for larger vehicles. And then we were able to go on horseback out to see the folks who were raising and herding reindeer. That was another, really special part of that trip. Route finding can be, it can be pretty straightforward. If you are, you have a really nice Michelin map in France. This particular picture is looking east on the major east-west road across northern Mongolia. This is essentially the Interstate 90 of Mongolia in its western reaches. And so you can see that route finding was a different proposition there. And we had this trip was undertaken in 2013. We chose to use just paper maps, but there are many other options available now. Sometimes the route finding, in addition to the grander scale of trying to get from one town to the other, was just which route, when you are given 5, 6, 7, or 8 different lanes traveling in the same direction. You can see on the right of your screen that particular road is quite a bit more washboarded, and that lane through the middle is pretty nice. So sometimes Adrian and I would be 100 yards apart on the same road, next to each other, asking how the road surface was in that particular spot. Here again, it's kind of a choose your own adventure, bumping over these ridges to try and find the smooth stretch of road, especially when pulling those trailers with 80 pounds of gear. The washboard can be pretty rugged. Sometimes, these roads are quite smooth here. It was really nice, but these tracks start to diverge, and there aren't always people around to ask. So some of those spots got pretty tricky. We're going roughly the direction we are facing here, but it's tough to know which one of these roads is the one that we want. Sometimes it was a far easier proposition with fewer choices. I still remember this very clearly. It was the most amazing dirt sidewalk evening of riding, just super smooth, amazing. Sometimes the tracks were less clear. Here still, you can see Adrian riding there on that right-hand track. Sometimes they got a bit fainter. These tire tracks are what we were instructed to follow to get to a pass through those mountains there. And that's it, that's the road. And sometimes when we turned off the road to find our camp spot, it was just riding across the steppe with no road around. Occasionally, there would be puddles that you'd have to avoid. There were times, I remember in Kazakhstan, where cars would be driving towards us, heading west, and then they would turn so their headlights were pointed north, and then south, just driving around big holes in the road like this. Sometimes those puddles were a bit deeper, and these river crossings. This is a floating bridge, like something the Army Corps of Engineers might put up for a temporary fix. Other bridges were pretty interesting to ride, and quite quite exciting when you are very far from any sort of trauma center or medical help, to do things like this that aren't like, it's not super crazy, but if something did go wrong, it could be could have some pretty serious consequences. Here's another river crossing. And sometimes we're able to just ride right through without unloading the bikes and trailers and everything. But other times it did require making several trips across that water, which was not super warm. We did encounter other folks who chose to ride with bikes with full panniers on front and rear, which that typically is a little bit lighter than having to drag the extra weight of the trailer, but it presents sort of a larger surface for the wind to encounter. Sometimes we were slowed down because that is what the road looked like. That makes for a really long day. And so sometimes, the thought was, it would be a really great way to cover this distance, a horse, because sometimes a horse definitely felt like the right tool for the job in areas like this. This road here, climbed, we pretty much were climbing from when we got up and got out of our tent until 3 p.m. And at one point, Adrian looked down at her computer and said, "I'm going 0," while still pedaling. There's some pretty amazing mountains. This is in Kyrgyzstan. Roughly 2/3 of the country is over 10,000 feet. It's an amazing place. It's sometimes at the end of a day like that, to be able to set up your tent next to a river with, wide open skies is pretty magical. Definitely saw some amazing sunsets on that trip. So thank you very much. I definitely welcome questions now, and I can, go back through if there's a picture that someone was interested in asking a question about. That's my contact information there, my email at adventure@watervillevalley.org, the work number, and then my personal cell. And then there's some kind of stories and pictures at that website, adrianandtyler.blogspot.com. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tyler. Right now, most folks are muted, so I know we've got some time, and Tyler is, like you said, glad to answer any questions. Until the screen share stops, I don't see folks, but please feel free to use the chat box there if there's any questions. Oh, there we go. We've got folks. Thank you so much. That was really great. I could look at those pictures for a really long time, so thank you for sharing them. And we'll give folks, if anyone has any specific questions or comments for Tyler, please unmute yourself, and I ought to be able to see folks if you just want to have a hand up. All right, I see one. Go ahead, Michelle. Who is muted and also is my mother, so thank you. And since Tyler is my mom,
oh my God.
1 second.
Now I'm
double. You're double.
My sound is not good. Can you hear me?
No, you need to. You're opened twice, so I'm going to ask that you remove yourself and come back in and ask your question.
Wait, I have to remove myself.
to disconnect, please.
Disconnect.
Sorry, just end your meeting and then please join us. I'll let you in, I promise. Keep going. Okay, while she is working on that, I'd love to have anybody else who we can see, and I'll just make a quick comment there. Okay, great. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, Leah, we came on a little late, so maybe Tyler covered this early on. We saw the bikes, and I was just wondering if he were doing a trip today or starting out on a new voyage, what he might recommend for what kind of bike, what special capabilities he might be looking for, in addition to being able to carry a lot.
Yeah.
The tires, gearing, and so forth.
That's a great question. My first answer is the bike that you have. It's like we ran into this this young fellow we were in Kazakhstan, and he had ridden a bike that he bought in Brussels for 100 euros. And he had ridden it, 2/3 of the way across the Asian continent. And so, it just like really, you can make many things work. But right now, we're in this really pretty magical time in terms of bikes, because there are just so many really capable machines for doing lots of different things. But the steel, I do like, for the reason that I said that, if something happens, if you need to, you could bend it or weld it, or, on one of those bigger trips. But it really depends on, what a person is looking to do. If you want to do overnight trips on rougher, like, dirt roads in New England, or just do end-to-end touring, you wouldn't have to get something quite rugged, and you could pack pretty lightly. And I would say, if you can, lighter is usually more enjoyable. But there are a couple things on those bigger trips. I actually don't know that I would use a 29-inch wheel or 700C. Kind of worldwide, 26-inch wheels and tires are much easier to find. Would be one big consideration.
And I'll put a little side note in. The other magical piece about this time, Bill, is that, and why you should use with what you have, is because you can't get anything right now. We're looking at next year still. Inventory on new stuff is hard, but there's wonderful used stuff out there.
Yes. And if you have further questions, or you would like me to delve deeper into any of those things, please feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to have a lengthier discussion with you about that stuff. I'm very happy to talk about it.
Excellent. And it was Colin McCabe, I think, just did a hand up. If you want to unmute yourself, we'd love to.
Go ahead. How long did it take to bike around a portion?
Tell me, which portion did you ask? Kazakhstan and Mongolia?
Kazakhstan.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So that particular trip, we spent a month in Kyrgyzstan, a month in Kazakhstan, a couple weeks in Russia, and then 6 weeks in Mongolia. So it was 4 months total, and about 4,000 miles.
Wow.
Can we follow up with
Yeah.
with Margaret's question?
Yeah.
Are you planning to do one soon or something?
That's a really good question. Yeah, Spring and I have been talking about doing a trip. We've got Sage has a seat on the back of my bike that he loves, and we're actually able to ride for, an hour, 90 minutes, we could take a break, do it again. And so, yeah, we're trying to figure out doing, a much shorter trip with Sage, and but sleeping out in the tent and everything. So stay tuned. We're working on it.
Excellent, thanks. And we'll try, Michelle, would you like to try again if you unmute yourself first?
Sorry. Well, looking at those, thank you for these photos and your looking at that vastness. How did you decide to do this, and what was it like to be in that space? I mean, not knowing how far you're going to go one day and what animal you will meet or not. I mean, the horses in the path, you were on a bike. Were they going to chase you?
So I'm really glad you asked that question. There's two parts to that I heard. One was, how did you decide if you don't know how far you're going to be able to go in a day, where you're going to sleep? And the other was about the animals. The animals that gave us the most trouble were dogs. And there were sometimes some very exciting encounters. We did in our handlebar bags, there were little pockets on either side that we would fill up with rocks of a certain size. But usually, if there was a dog that came out from near someone's house or near someone's living area, if we stopped, they usually barked, but didn't continue to attack. And so then we'd wait until they got bored, or if we were walking, we were less interesting. But when we were on the bikes with the trailers, there's like, as exciting as it is to chase two wheels, chasing six wheels that are making a lot of noise must be a really good time for some of these dogs. So that we did learn to carry rocks if we needed, but usually stopping did the trick. And then as far as where to sleep, that's one of the, there are many ways to do it. You can have an itinerary where, you say we're going to ride 20 miles and stay at this bed and breakfast, and then cover 20 miles and stay at another. But, on that kind of larger expedition style where you're crossing countries, that just wasn't a possibility. There were times where it would be, several weeks between sleeping in a place that wasn't our tent. And one thing that's really magical and also can be challenging about touring on a bicycle is that you end up in some weird places, because sometimes, you've been riding through sand and it's been a hard day. And so you've covered 60 miles, but you've been at it for 12 hours and you're just done. And so it's like you're not going to go anymore. So you find this tree next to the road that, like, people stop and change baby diapers under that tree because it's the only one around that there's any shade, and it's okay, awesome, this is where we're going to spend the night. And you also get to spend the night, there was one night in Kyrgyzstan, we kind of like, okay, we're done now. And we were up in the mountains, we wandered off the road a little bit, we were in the trees, and we were like making a little spot for our tent and discovered a bunch of morels. And so our noodle soup that night had fresh morels. And, it's like, that's the sort of thing that doesn't happen when you're just, on a train or in a rental car,
Thank you. Wow.
Oh, that's great. I again, I really appreciate you taking time to share some of your adventures with us. And I think if not seeing any other comments right now, so I want to again appreciate your time, and Sage was great. Thank you, thank him for joining us.
We'll have to thank my friend Jim, who just drove over here, and because he was watching.
Thanks, Jim. Good job. Well, it's all good. So, again, it's great having you in the Valley. It's great having you on line tonight. And if this presentation is recorded and will be available from our website if you'd like to share with anyone additionally. And we look forward to seeing you around and hearing more. So,
All right.
thanks so
Thank you very much.
Tyler.
I really
Thank
appreciate
you,
the opportunity.
Tyler.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Wonderful, wonderful.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.